At 6 in the morning, the phone rang. My granddaughter's voice was trembling. "Grandpa, please don't wear that brown hat today." I thought he was joking. 3 hours later, I was stunned to see that hat on the head of a cold corpse surrounded by police. But the most painful stab did not come from handcuffs. It came from my own daughter. Right at the scene, she did not run to hug me. She stood next to her husband, pointed at my face, and screamed in front of everyone. "I told you, Kurt. This old man is crazy. Now put him in a mental hospital so we can sell this damn farm." My 40 years of sacrifice were worth only one signature to sell the land. I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you? And where are you listening? Sunrises in Montana are never gentle, always accompanied by a biting cold, the kind that seeps into the bones of a 6-8-year-old man like me. I stood on the weathered wooden porch, clutching a steaming mug of black coffee, cheap gas station coffee, strong enough to keep me awake. On my head was a frayed brown cowboy hat. To outsiders, it was just another old piece of junk, but to me it was everything. It was the last thing my wife, Martha, had ever owned. 40 years earlier, she had placed it on my head the day we drove the first fence post on this ranch. "Arthur," she had said, her eyes shining with hope, "promise me you'll never lose this place." I had promised, and now, alone among hundreds of empty acres, that promise was the only thing holding me up. But that sacred silence was shattered at 10 a.m. A shiny new black SUV, the kind that city real estate agents like to drive to show they know the terrain, barreled down my dusty dirt road. It was my son-in-law, Kurt. He wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a middle-aged man in a suit that looked more expensive than my tractor, a gold Rolex that gleamed in the sunday. They looked at my farm not as a house, but as a delicious steak on a plate. They sat in my living room, as if they owned it. Kurt began to spout off flowery words I was sick of hearing. Eco-resort, exploitation potential, passive cash flow. He talked about leveling the old horse barn to build an infinity pool. "Arthur," Kurt said, calling me by my first name instead of Dad whenever outsiders were around. "Dad is getting old. He needs cash to support himself more than he needs to struggle with this pile of dirt." I looked at my daughter. Sarah sat there, curled up in the old armchair her mother used to love. She just looked down at the floor, fidgeting with her shirt, not daring to look me in the eye even once. Her silence was more painful than Kurt's words. I felt like an invisible ghost in the house I had built brick by brick. Then suddenly, Kurt's eyes stopped above my head. He smirked, a smile that was devoid of any warmth or affection. "You know," he said, his voice half joking, but his eyes as sharp as razors, "that brown hat. It's very old-fashioned. It looks so tattered. Be careful, Arthur. One day that old hat will cause you great trouble." At the time, I just thought he was mocking the aesthetic taste of an old countryman. I didn't realize it was a threat. When their luxury car drove away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a strong smell of perfume, I went to check the doors and windows out of habit. That's when I stopped. The spare key to the warehouse, which I always hid under the withered geranium pot outside the back door, was gone. I stood rooted to the spot, a feeling of unease creeping into my stomach. But then I shook my head and smiled bitterly. I must be old and senile, having forgotten it somewhere. That's what I reassured myself. Little did I know that my self-proclaimed stupidity was being exploited by them. It was about to become the perfect weapon for them to bury me. Forever. 6 o'clock in the morning. The phone rang loudly, tearing the stillness of dawn. For a farmer used to waking up before the sun like me, that hour was not strange. But a call at that hour was. It usually meant only two things. Someone had died, or a disaster had struck. I picked up the phone, my hands still shaking from the cold. On the other end of the line was a familiar voice, but it sounded painfully unfamiliar. It was Leo, my 5-year-old grandson. He didn't say hello. His voice was a whisper, urgent and trembling, as if he were hiding in the closet or under the bed to call me. "Grandpa," he gasped, "today. Today don't wear that brown hat. The hat you usually wear." I frowned, not understanding what was going on. "Leo, why? What hat?" "I can't explain. Just promise me. Don't wear it today. Please." Then the phone hung up. There was only the endless beeping. I stood there, frozen by the old landline. My heart was pounding. Leo was not a kid who would joke around like that. There was something in his voice, a raw fear, that made my stomach clench. Out of habit, I walked to the door and reached for the hat rack. My brown Stetson, the one I'd worn for the past 10 years, was still there. I was about to put it on like I always did, but Leo's plea kept ringing in my ears. Please. I paused. A bad feeling, the survival instinct that had kept me alive through the harsh winters in this land, told me to trust it. I pulled my hand back and reached for the old baseball cap with the logo of the local baseball team hanging next to it. It didn't suit me, but it was safe. At 9 in the morning, I drove my old Ford pickup into town to buy feed. The highway was quieter than usual, and my unease grew with each turn of the wheel. When I pulled into the feed store parking lot, what I saw wasn't the familiar farmers chatting over their morning coffee. It was the warning lights, green and red, flashing incessantly, dyeing the gloomy morning. 3 police cars had cordoned off the scene. Yellow no-traffic tape was strung across the warehouse door. A curious crowd stood whispering, their eyes both fearful and curious. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like lead. I pushed through the crowd, trying to see what had happened. And then I saw. Lying face down on the cold ground, next to the corn sacks, was a woman. She was motionless. Her blood had dried on the cement. But what froze my blood even more than the Montana cold, wasn't the body. It was what was on her head. Hiding the face of that unfortunate woman, it wasn't a sheet. It was a hat. A brown cowboy hat. I couldn't breathe. I recognized the fraying on the brim. I recognized the way it was slightly crooked to the left, because I held it in my dominant hand. And worst of all, I knew that inside the brim were engraved 3 letters. A.M.P. Arthur Michael Pendleton. My whole world collapsed around me in that moment. It wasn't just a body. It was a death sentence, and it was wearing my hat. I stood there, rooted to the spot in the dusty parking lot, surrounded by the crackling of police radios and the suspicious eyes of the crowd. Sheriff Brody, with whom I had hunted deer every fall for the past 20 years, was walking toward me. But today his gaze lacked the warmth of old friendship. It was cold, professional, and accusing. In his hand was a clear evidence bag. Inside was my hat. "Arthur," Brody said sharply, no longer calling me old friend, "I need you to confirm. Is this your hat?" My throat felt dry as if I had swallowed a handful of desert sand. I tried to stay calm, to cling to a glimmer of hope. "Brody, there are hundreds of people in this town who wear brown Stetsons. Why do you think it's mine?" Brody said nothing. He just turned the bag over. On the inside brim, where the leather had worn away from years of sweat, was hand-embroidered in faded gold thread, "For my Arthur, M. Martha, my wife." She'd embroidered it on our 10th wedding anniversary. I was stunned. All excuses caught in my throat. It wasn't just a hat. It was irrefutable evidence. At that moment, a shiny black BMW pulled up, slamming on its brakes right next to the warning line. The door swung open. It was Kurt and Sarah. They were too fast. Too fast for a crime that had just been discovered. Kurt jumped out of the car, his expensive business suit looking out of place in this scene of death. He ran straight toward me, his face full of panic. "Dad!" "Oh my God, are you okay?" He grabbed my shoulder, his grip so tight it felt like I was being handcuffed. Then he turned to Sheriff Brody, his voice filled with a desperate plea. "Sheriff, please be gentle with him. My father-in-law. He's not feeling well." I froze. "What the hell are you talking about, Kurt?" Kurt didn't look at me. He looked at Brody, his eyes brimming with tears, perfectly playing the role of the dutiful son-in-law in extreme pain. I told my wife, Kurt choked out. "She's been getting forgetful lately. She wanders around at night without knowing what she's doing. We were going to put her in a nursing home for better care. Oh my God, did she have another attack last night?" Each word he uttered felt like a knife stabbing straight into my heart. He wasn't protecting me. He was openly confirming to the police that I was a demented old man capable of doing crazy things without even realizing it. It was building the perfect scenario to send me to jail, or worse, to the insane asylum. I looked at my daughter. Sarah stood there, sobbing, unable to meet my eyes. Her silence was the cruelest sentence. What is she doing? I asked myself in silent despair. Is she protecting me, Or is she hammering the final nails into the coffin she's prepared for me? The moment Sheriff Brody nodded in acknowledgement, Kurt turned to me. For a brief second, when no one was looking, the corner of his lips curved into a faint smile. It wasn't the look of a loved one's concern. It was the cold look of a predator who had just seen its prey trapped. The interrogation room at the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office was colder than any winter I'd ever spent on the ranch. 4 gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as if to bore into my brain. Brody sat across from me, no longer the hunting buddy he was. Now he was the law, and I was a first-degree murder suspect. The victim's name is Chloe Simmons. Brody tossed a folder onto the table, scattering crime scene photos. A real estate broker from Billings who specializes in hunting down old ranches to convert into luxury resorts. She's called you 3 times in the past week, Arthur, and you refused to see her. I looked at the photos, my stomach twisting. I remembered her, the woman with the sharp voice who had been pestering me about selling the land. I didn't kill her, Brody. I just told her to stop calling. Or did you ask her out to the barn for a final talk? Brody leaned forward. Kurt testified that you were very agitated when you heard she was trying to force the price of the farm. Your hat was at the scene. The motive was there. Arthur, everything was against you. But the hardest blow didn't come from Brody. It came 2 hours later. The heavy iron door opened, and Sarah walked in. She looked haggard, her eyes swollen from crying. I tried to stand up and hug her, but the handcuffs held me to the table. Sarah, I called, my voice hoarse. You have to believe me. I didn't do it. Kurt, he's lying. Sarah didn't sit down. She stood close to the door, as if afraid I would hurt her. She looked at me, not with anger, but with cruel pity. Dad, her voice trembled, breaking. Kurt showed me the medical reports about your dementia. What? You're sane. Sane people don't wander around in the middle of the night and do terrible things. Dad, Sarah sobbed, if you were really sick, we'd get the best lawyers. We'd get you sent to a mental institution instead of prison. That's the best way. I was stunned. Kurt wasn't just setting me up legally. He'd instilled in my daughter the idea that her father was crazy. He'd taken away the most precious thing I had, my children's trust. Don't listen to him, Sarah. Ask Leo. Leo knows the truth. He called me this morning. At the mention of Leo, Sarah cringed, then quickly left as if running away. I screamed for the phone, my only right now. I called the home phone. Kurt answered. Let me talk to Leo, I roared. Kurt's voice on the other end was eerily calm. Leo's in shock, Dad. He keeps talking about the brown hat. I think it's best if you don't bother him anymore. I've taken his phone away so he can rest. You can rest there. He hung up. I sat alone in the cold, dark cell. I realized a horrifying truth. I wasn't just fighting the police or a wrongful conviction. I was fighting my own family, in a war that had been disarmed before it even began. The family lawyer, a slick man from the city that Kurt hired, bailed me out. But the price for my temporary freedom was house arrest. Kurt, under the pretext of worrying about Dad, had hired a big, burly nurse named Brutus to keep an eye on me 24/7. He sat in the living room, eyes glued to the TV but ears listening for my every move. As soon as I got home, a thought flashed through my mind like lightning in the dark. Martha, she always bought everything in pairs. That anniversary, she didn't just give me 1 hat. She gave me 2. One for you to get dirty at work. One for you to wear to church with me, she'd said. If the police had one, the other would be here. If I found it, I could prove that Kurt had switched them, or at least sow suspicion. I waited until Brutus's snores were loud. I crept into the master bedroom, my heart pounding like a burglar in my own home. I opened the closet. Empty. The hook where I always hung my second hat. Nothing. More than that, I noticed the disturbance. Martha's memento box was out of place. Our old photos seemed to have been picked up and put down in a hurry. They had ransacked my house. Before the police arrived, I searched the room in a panic. And then, in the little trash can in the corner, something Kurt knew a senile old man would never look at, I found it. A crumpled receipt. I smoothed it out, my hands shaking so much I nearly tore the fragile paper. It was a receipt from the Western Wear store in Billings. Purchase date, 2 days ago. Item, Stetson cowboy hat, brown, size 7 3/8. Same size as me. A chill ran down my spine. Kurt hadn't just stolen my hat to commit the crime. He'd already bought a brand new one. For what? To replace the old one if I found out? Or so he could wear it and impersonate me in the dark? The calculation made me sick. They don't just want to put me in jail. I sat down on the floor, clutching the receipt. They want to erase my existence. They want to turn me into a ghost in this very house before they actually bury me. I thought that was the end of despair, but I was wrong. As I sank into the darkness of the room, my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. I know it wasn't you, but you're paying for what you did 30 years ago. Karma is coming, Arthur. The phone slipped from my hand. 30 years ago? What ghost from the past is rising from the grave to shake hands with my son-in-law? That night, I couldn't sleep. The anonymous message haunted me, like a ghost in the dark corners of my room. Karma? Arthur? What karma? 30 years ago, I was just a farmer trying to protect my land. The next morning, I secretly called Hank, an old friend who used to work at the town post office, who knew the nooks and crannies of this little place better than anyone. I gave him the strange phone number. Hank promised to check. As I waited, memories came flooding back. 30 years ago, the land dispute with the Millers. They had tried to encroach on the northern boundary of the farm, where the only stream ran. I had sued them and won. The Millers went bankrupt, had to sell the land, and left in disgrace. I remember the hateful look in Miller's eyes before he left. You'll pay for this, Pendleton. I'll be back sooner or later. Could it be them? Were they working with Kurt to get revenge on me? The thought sent shivers down my spine, but I didn't have time to speculate. Kurt had tightened the siege. He had hired 2 big, fierce-looking security men to stand guard 24 divided by 7 inches front of the farm gate. To protect you from those annoying reporters, he said with a fake smile. You can rest easy. Rest? He was keeping me under house arrest on my own land. I was like a caged animal looking out at the outside world through invisible bars. That afternoon the phone rang. It was Hank, but his voice was no longer calm as usual. It was trembling, full of fear. Arthur, don't call me again. Hank, what's going on? Did you find anything? Forget it, Arthur. I don't want anything to do with this anymore. They just called and threatened me. They said if I help you again, they'll burn my house down. I have a wife and children, Arthur. I'm sorry. The phone hung up. A long, cold beep sounded. I let my hands fall. They weren't just watching me. They were watching everyone who dared to help me. I looked out the window and saw 2 guards standing there smoking, laughing, and talking. I shuddered at the horrifying realization. I wasn't just fighting Kurt, a lone wolf. I was surrounded by a pack of hungry hyenas, old enemies and new, waiting to tear apart this old lonely prey. I knew I didn't have much time. The 2 guards Kurt hired, actually unmarked jailers, usually changed shifts at 7 a.m. That was my only chance. I crept through the fence behind the stables, the dry grass scratching my face, but I didn't care. I had to see Leo. He was the only one who knew the truth, and more importantly, he was the only sane blood relative in this crazy family. I hid behind the sagebrush at the county road intersection where the yellow school bus usually picked up the kids. The brakes hissed as the bus stopped. The door opened. I held my breath, waiting for Leo's blonde hair to appear. But no one got out. I rushed out, stopping the bus before it could start. The old driver, who had driven his mother to school 30 years ago, looked at me with concern. "Where's Leo, Sam?" I asked, my voice cracking with worry. Sam sighed, shaking his head. "Don't you know, Arthur? His dad, Kurt, he asked for an indefinite leave of absence 3 days ago. He said he was traumatized because of your business." I stood frozen in the middle of the dirt road, watching the bus disappear into the dust. Traumatized? Leo was the toughest kid I'd ever known. He wasn't that weak. I shakily pulled out my phone and called Sarah. "This time," she answered, but her sobbing hurt me more than 1,000 knives. "Dad, please," her voice broke. "Don't look for Leo anymore. He's really panicked. He keeps having nightmares. Kurt, he's taking me to special therapy. The doctor said he needs to be isolated from the source of his fear. You." "Sarah, wake up. He's not sick. He's being held captive by his own father to cover up his tracks." Dad, stop talking. I don't want to hear your delusions anymore. He hung up. I let my hand fall, the phone sliding to the cold ground. I understood. Kurt wasn't just a greedy land grabber. He was a real monster. He was using his own son as a hostage, filling his young mind with lies to brainwash him, turning him into a weapon against me. He doesn't just want to take away my past and present, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. He wants to take away my future, the only bloodline of the Pendleton family. If I didn't act quickly, Leo wouldn't just be a victim. He would become another version of Sarah, or worse, be destroyed forever by his own father. 3 days later, Kurt returned. This time, he wasn't alone. He had Sarah with him and a lawyer with a sharp, rat-like face, a thick file tucked under his arm. I knew what it was. A power of attorney. Dad, Kurt said, entering the living room, his voice sweet but his eyes searching. How are you feeling today? The doctor said you need more rest. I sat in the old armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket. I didn't look at him. I let my eyes glaze over, my hands shaking as I held my cold cup of tea. Who's there? Ah, Carl? It's been a while since I've seen you, I said, deliberately calling him by his name, my voice hoarse as if I'd just woken up from a long sleep. Kurt paused for a second, then a triumphant smile slowly spread across his face. He turned to Sarah, whispering, but making sure I could hear. See, I told you. The medicine. I mean, the rest is working. Dad really needs our help to manage things. Sarah looked at me, her eyes red with pity and relief. Yeah, maybe you're right. Dad really is. Too old. They started to spread the papers on the table. I pretended to nod off, my head on my chest. Kurt, convinced that the old lion had been completely tamed, began to let his guard down. He went out onto the porch to answer the phone, the glass door only half closed. I held my breath, listening. His words reached me clearly, sharp as a razor. Yeah, everything's fine. The old man's about to sign. It was worth my while. Oh, and that Chloe. She deserved to die. Dare to ask for more percentage. Don't worry, it's neat. No one will suspect anything. My heart was pounding, but on the outside I remained motionless. Chloe. He had just mentioned the victim's name. And the motive, money, percentage. He didn't just kill people out of a sudden conflict. This was a calculated purge. When Kurt returned, I was still sitting there, a harmless old man. He put the pen in my hand, pointed to the signature line. Sign here, Dad, and you'll rest in peace forever. I held the pen, my hand shaking perfectly, but instead of signing, I dropped the pen on the floor. Oh my. I'm really old, I muttered, bending down to pick up the pen, hiding the cold smile that had just appeared on my lips. They thought the old lion had lost all his fangs and claws. They did not know that, in the darkness of this false senility, I was sharpening each claw sharper than ever. I waited until the taillights of Kurt's BMW disappeared down the dusty road leading to town. He took Sarah to dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in town, an early celebration of the imminent confinement of his aging father-in-law to the mental institution. My old office, which Kurt had now occupied as the headquarters for his takeover, was locked, but he had forgotten one thing. I had lived in this house for 68 years. I knew how to pick that ancient brass lock with a dull pocket knife. I slipped inside, my heart pounding like a sledgehammer. The room reeked of his expensive perfume. I frantically rummaged through the drawers, and then, under a stack of forged contracts, I found it. A red folder labeled Project Montana. I opened it and froze. Chloe Simmons was more than just a broker. She was a surveyor. The maps in the file weren't subdivision maps, they were mineral maps. Deep beneath the barren soil of my family's farm was no useless rock. There was a huge deposit of rare earths, the precious metals sought after by the electronic battery industry. It wasn't worth millions, it could be worth hundreds of millions. I trembled as I flipped through the pages. Pre-printed emails showed that Chloe had discovered this and was demanding a larger share from Kurt. 50% or I'll tell the old man the truth, one email read. The motive was there. Kurt didn't kill out of anger. He killed to cover up a gold mine. I got you, you bastard, I whispered, gripping the file, but the joy was short-lived. Suddenly, a siren blared from outside. Flashing red and green lights swept past the windows. Before I could process what was happening, The door to the room flew open. Sheriff Brody rushed in, gun drawn, and right behind him was Kurt, looking disgustedly triumphant. "See, Sheriff!" Kurt yelled, pointing at me. "I told you!" My dad went into a paranoid rage and broke into my room. "What's that he's holding?" "It's the victim's file." I looked up at the ceiling. A tiny red dot was blinking from the smoke detector. A hidden camera. He knew I was coming. "Arthur, put the file down," Brody yelled, his voice filled with frustration. Kurt stepped forward, his voice taking on a tone of fake anguish. "Now it's clear. My dad killed her because he found her surveying the land without permission. Dad's always been obsessed with strangers trespassing on the farm." "Oh my God, you'd kill someone over a few clods of dirt?" I stood there, still holding the evidence that could have cleared me, but now it had been transformed into the perfect motive for the crime that Kurt had just thrust into my hands. The truth was in my hands, but in the next second, it became the handcuffs that tightened around my wrists. Kurt's slick lawyer once again saved me from the police station with the humanitarian excuse that my client is old, weak, and mentally unstable. In reality, they just wanted to take me back to the barless cage that was this farm to make it easier to control. That night, as I sat staring blankly at the pile of ashes in the fireplace, a rustling sound came from the back door. Someone had slipped a folded piece of paper through the crack. I opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was scribbled, hurried. "Meet me at the old barn at midnight. I know the truth about the hat." I arrived at the meeting place, clutching the old unloaded shotgun, the only weapon Kurt hadn't confiscated because he thought it was harmless. In the darkness of the dusty, spider-web-filled barn, a figure stepped out. It wasn't Kurt, nor was it his henchman. It was a woman. "You're Arthur Pendleton," she said, her voice hoarse from smoking. "I'm Maggie, Kurt's former chief accountant." Maggie was in her 40s, her face gaunt from working, but her eyes shining with hatred. She told me that Kurt had fired her 6 months ago to cover up embezzlement, and worse, he had withheld his last 3 months' pay and severance pay. "He thinks I'm a stupid woman who can be bullied." Maggie took a drag from her cigarette, the red flame glowing in the darkness. "But he's wrong. I always keep my insurance." She pulled out an old phone, the screen cracked. She opened a video. The image was blurry, shaky, clearly filmed through a door or window, but I still recognized him. Kurt. He was standing in his garage, holding a brown hat, my hat. He was practicing how to place it on an old mannequin's head, adjusting the angle, even taking out his phone to take a test shot. My heart was about to jump out of my chest. This was proof. He had planned the scene all along. "You'll testify for me in court?" I asked, my voice trembling with hope. Maggie smiled faintly, a bitter smile of someone who had experienced too much life. "Go to court? Let him hire a lawyer to drown me? No way, old man. I need the money to leave this damn town and start over." She held up a small black USB. $50,000. Cash. No bargaining. You get the original video, I get a new life. Is that fair? $50,000. In my account right now, after Kurt had frozen most of it, there was less than $2,000 left in cash for miscellaneous expenses. "Give me 2 days," I pleaded. "1 day," Maggie said firmly, then backed into the shadows. "Tomorrow night at the old truck stop off the highway. If you don't show up, or if I see the handcuffs, this USB will go to the bottom of the Yellowstone River." She was gone as quickly as she had appeared. I stood rooted to the spot, clutching the useless shotgun. $50,000 to buy my life back. I had to find a way, before Kurt the Wolf caught the scent of betrayal. I had less than 24 hours to come up with $50,000 in cash. With my bank account frozen, I had only one choice: sell my soul. I drove to the pawn shop in Billings, taking with me the most precious things I had left: the 1,894 Winchester rifle my grandfather had used to protect his first cattle, the solid gold pocket watch, the only memento my father had left before he died in a mining accident. As the shopkeeper counted the worn $100 bills onto the glass counter, I felt like I was selling off the bones and flesh of my ancestors. But I had no choice. My life, and the honor of my entire family, was on that USB drive. 11 o'clock at night. I parked my old pickup in a deserted suburban truck park where only the neon lights of a rundown diner and the hum of a tractor-trailer engine cut through the cold night. I sat there, clutching my purse, staring at the road leading into the lot. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. No red sedan appeared. Maggie, desperate for money, couldn't miss this opportunity. Unless she couldn't make it. Something was wrong. I turned the car around and headed back toward the farm, my heart heavy. I turned on the radio to dispel the eerie silence. The late-night news came on, crackling and intermittent. A serious accident just occurred on Bozeman Pass. A red sedan lost control and went off a cliff. Police have identified the victim as a middle-aged woman, a local resident. My hands froze on the wheel. The red car. Bozeman Pass. That was the road Maggie had to take to get to the meeting point. I stepped on the gas, rushing home like a madman. When I pushed open the door and entered the living room, a sight froze my blood even more than the cold outside. The fireplace was burning, and sitting in my favorite leather armchair was none other than Kurt. He was sipping my whiskey, and on his lap was a tabby cat. I recognized that cat. It was the cat Maggie often showed off pictures of on her desk. "You're home late, Dad," Kurt said, his voice eerily calm, stroking the trembling cat. "I found this poor cat wandering around the street, so I brought it in. Its owner must be careless." He looked up, looked straight into my eyes, his smile as thin as a razor blade. "Dad, at this age, you should be careful who you hang out with. Some people are prone to traffic accidents, especially when they go the wrong way." He knew. He not only knew, he did it first. He killed Maggie, and now he was sitting in my house, petting her pet like a trophy. I backed away, leaning against the door. I had nowhere to go. The law could not protect me. The only witness he had ever had was silenced. He was more than a greedy con man. He was a serial killer, and I was next on his hit list. Now there was only one person in the world who knew the truth and was still breathing. Leo, the poor nephew held captive by his own father. I knew my time was up. Maggie's death wasn't just a threat. It was a death sentence hanging over my head. The police would be here soon, and this time the slick lawyer wouldn't save me. I had only one choice. Bet it all on Leo. At 2 a.m., I drove my pickup truck, headlights off, and parked 2 blocks from the Nouveau-Riche suburbs of Bozeman. Kurt and Sarah's house came into view, as large and cold as its owner. I knew the back door was never locked from the inside, a careless habit I'd reminded Sarah of 100 times. Tonight, it was my salvation. I slipped inside, my heart pounding like it was going to burst out of my chest. I groped my way up to the 2nd floor, to Leo's room. The doorknob was cold. I tried it. It was locked. But not from the inside. It was locked from the outside with a cheap latch. Blood rushed to my head. He locked his son up like an animal. I pried open the latch and pushed the door open. Leo was huddled on the bed, emaciated, his eyes dark from lack of sleep and fear. When he saw me, he almost screamed, but I covered his mouth in time. "Grandpa," he whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm such a coward." That night, I saw Dad take his brown hat to the garage. But Dad said if I said anything, he'd send me to a reform school for bad kids. Dad said they'd beat me to death there. I hugged my poor nephew tightly. So he knew. He was a living witness. "Let's go, Leo. I'll protect you." But before we could move, crack. The hallway light turned on, blinding. I spun around. Kurt was leaning against the door, his arms crossed, his familiar triumphant smile on his lips. Beside him was Sarah, pale and shivering in her pajamas. "See, Sarah?" Kurt's voice rang out, eerily calm. "I told you to lock the door. Your dad's having another meltdown." He broke into the house in the middle of the night, trying to kidnap our son. "Look at Leo. He's so scared he can't breathe." Leo cowered in my arms, not daring to look up at his dad. "No! Sarah, listen to me!" I yelled, trying to explain. "Kurt locked him up. He threatened him." But Sarah didn't listen. She saw the scene before her through the lens Kurt had worked so hard to build. A crazy old man controlling her little son. "Dad? Dad, please go away!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "You're scaring us. You're hurting us all. Why can't you just leave us alone?" My daughter's words were like sledgehammers to my heart. I let go of Leo and stepped back. I saw the triumph in Kurt's eyes. He didn't just want me imprisoned. He wanted me to slowly die alone, abandoned and feared by the people I loved most. He wanted to destroy my soul before he took my life. The next morning, Kurt returned to the farm. But this time he wasn't alone, and he didn't need to put on a show. He was accompanied by the rat-faced lawyer and two large men in white medical scrubs, the kind you only see in places for the insane. He tossed 2 sheets of paper onto the oak table, right next to my half-finished cup of coffee. "Choose, father-in-law," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "The one on the left is the contract to transfer this farm to me, for a nominal sum of $1. The one on the right is an involuntary admission to the Gallatin County Psychiatric Institute, signed by your beloved daughter because you are a danger to the community." I looked at the 2 pieces of paper, my hands shaking with anger. You dare." "I don't have much time," he interrupted. "Global Mining is waiting for my signature to transfer the $50 million deposit for the rare earth mine under our feet. I've already sold them the mining rights. Now all that's left is my stupid signature." He sold out the Pendleton family legacy before I was even dead. $50 million for the blood and sweat of 4 generations. I picked up the contract. Kurt smirked, thinking I had surrendered. But no. I tore it in half, then in 4, and threw the pieces straight at his face. "I'd rather rot in that insane asylum than let you sell out the souls of my ancestors. Get out of my house." Kurt's smile faded. He sighed, looking regretful. "What a pity. I was hoping we could settle this peacefully. Guys, my father is having another seizure. Take care of him for me." The 2 nurses rushed at me. I tried to resist, swinging my old fists, but my 68-year-old strength was no match for 2 strong men in their prime. They pinned me to the floor, right on the carpet my wife had woven herself. A cold needle pierced my bicep. Sedatives. "Let me go, you bastard." I tried to scream, but my tongue began to numb. My eyelids felt heavy as if they were wearing lead. The world around me began to sway, darkening. The last image I saw was Kurt's face bent down, distorted and blurred. "Good night, old father-in-law," his voice echoed as if from a deep tunnel. "When you wake up tomorrow, everything here will be mine. Everything." I sank into darkness, carrying the shame and humiliation of a man deprived of freedom in the very house he had spent his life building. I woke not to the familiar Montana sunlight, but to the blinding white light of industrial fluorescence. The smell of antiseptic assaulted my nostrils, cold and numb. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, not just from the medicine. I looked down. My wrists and ankles were locked to the metal bedposts with thick leather straps. I was in the box, the slang for the special isolation room at the Gallatin County Psychiatric Hospital, reserved for the most dangerous, or those most in need of being forgotten. The heavy metal door swung open with a deafening screech. Kurt walked in. He looked like he'd stepped out of a business magazine, his perfectly tailored Armani suit unwrinkled, a stark contrast to my drab hospital gown. He'd come to enjoy one last moment of triumph before I was sent to the long-term care unit, where he believed I would rot. "Well, father-in-law," he pulled a metal chair closer to my bed, sitting down with the ease of a superior. "You look peaceful. The medicine here is really good." I wanted to spit in his face, but my tongue was numb, my mouth was dry. I could only glare at him, pouring all my hatred into that look. Kurt smiled, the smile only a demon could smile at this moment. He looked around the room to make sure no one was there, then leaned close to my ear. His minty breath and arrogance blew against my face. "You know," he whispered, his voice low but clear, each word like a nail hammered into my brain. "No one will believe you if you scream now. They'll just think you're having a panic attack. So I'll tell you a secret." He paused for a moment, enjoying my painful wait. "Chloe, that greedy bitch. She didn't just want the money. She wanted 50% of the rare earth mine. She threatened to tell Dad if I didn't agree. How stupid. So I took Dad's favorite brown hat, hid in the shed. When he turned around, smack! A clean hit to the back of the head. Then I put the hat on his head. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Dad gets in here, and I get everything. Perfect, right?" Anger erupted like a volcano in my chest. I roared, trying to struggle, ripping off the leather straps, but my old sedative-fueled body wasn't listening to reason anymore. Only pathetic, choked grunts came out of my throat. Helpless tears welled up in the corners of my eyes. Kurt stood up, adjusted his tie, and watched me struggle helplessly with utter satisfaction. "Get some rest, Dad. You've got a long trip tomorrow." He turned and walked away, his patent leather shoes clicking on the cold tile floor. The iron door slammed shut, trapping me and this horrible truth within four white walls. He had confessed. He had told it all. But there was no judge, no jury, just me, a certified insane old man. Had I really lost? Was this truth going to be buried with me in this living tomb? 3 days later, they dragged me out of that white box, dressed me in a wrinkled suit, and took me to the district courthouse. I sat there, in the dock, feeling like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The sedatives were still in my head. My tongue was still tied. It was exactly what Kurt wanted the judge to see. A demented old man, no longer able to defend himself. Across the room, Kurt sat next to his rat-faced lawyer, his expression fake serious. He was telling the court about the pain of having to hospitalize his father-in-law. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, his voice as smooth as oil, "my client had no choice. Mr. Pendleton had become a real danger. He was wandering around at night, breaking into his daughter's house, terrorizing his granddaughter. We have a doctor's report of his acute paranoia." He presented distorted evidence. My break-in to save Leo turned into uncontrolled violence. My resistance to the injection turned into madness. I turned to look at the audience. Sarah sat there, alone. She bowed her head, her hands tightly clasped together. She didn't dare look up at me even once. Her silence was like a knife cutting into my heart. My daughter, the child I had cherished since she was a baby, was now sitting silently while her husband buried her father alive. "Arthur Pendleton," the judge's voice rang out, cold and distant. "Based on the medical evidence and the testimony of the family, the court has reasonable grounds to believe that you are incompetent." "No!" I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and expose Kurt's true face, but my body no longer obeyed my will. I could only sit there, staring at the wooden gavel in the judge's hand. That gavel was about to fall. Once it hit the table, my life would be over. I would be locked up forever, and Kurt would become the legal guardian, which would mean he would swallow up the farm, the mine, and the family name. "The court rules." The judge raised his gavel. I closed my eyes, waiting for the fateful knock. It was over. Bam! A loud noise rang out, but it wasn't the judge's gavel. It was the door to the courtroom being violently pushed open. The entire courtroom turned. Standing at the door, panting and sweating, was Leo. He looked skinny, his clothes disheveled, as if he had just fled from somewhere terrible. But in his eyes I saw a fire I had never seen before. In his hand he held a tablet. "Stop!" Leo shouted, his voice cracking but echoing through the quiet room. "My grandfather is not crazy. I have proof. I know who the real crazy one is here." In that moment, watching my 15-year-old grandson stand tall in the courtroom, confronting his own father to defend me, I saw a picture of myself as a young man. The Pendleton bloodline had not been tainted by Kurt. It still flowed, strong and resilient. I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? Leo shakily stepped up to the judge's podium, still clutching the tablet like a life preserver. He connected it to the courtroom's speaker system. There was a brief, suffocating silence. Then, Kurt's familiar, cold, arrogant voice rang out, each word distinct. "Chloe, that greedy bitch." I took my beloved brown hat. Smack! A clean blow to the back of the neck. Kill two birds with one stone. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. I saw Sarah jerk her head up, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at her husband, who had been her bed partner for so long. The stark, cruel truth was like a bucket of cold water splashed straight into her face, washing away all her blindness and foolish trust. "Turn it off! Turn it off now! You bastard! You dare set me up!" Kurt screamed, madly rushing towards Leo. But before he could touch the boy, 2 policemen rushed in, knocking him to the floor. The sound of handcuffs on his wrists was cold and decisive. "Let me go. I was wronged. It's all that old man's fault. That stupid wife's fault." He continued to scream, blaming everyone around him as he was dragged away. Sarah burst into tears, the heartbreaking cry of a woman who had just realized she had been living with the devil. She ran to me, knelt down, hugged these old legs, and sobbed, "Daddy!" "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I put my hand on my daughter's messy hair, tears welling up in my eyes. The nightmare was over. A few months later, I sat on the old rocking chair on the porch, watching the red sunset fall over the Montana hills. On my head was a crisp brown Stetson, the old one still in the courthouse evidence room as a relic of the crime. Leo sat beside me, busy carving a log with the pocket knife I had just given him. He was back in school, happier and stronger than ever. You know, Leo looked up, his eyes sparkling. My father, Kurt, thought he could bury everything under rocks and money. I smiled, patting his head. Yes, honey. But he forgot one thing. Truth is like a seed. No matter how deep it is buried, under how many layers of rocks, it will sprout and grow strong when the light of courage shines on it. And you, Leo, are that light. I looked out into the distance, where the land of our ancestors still stretched out endlessly. It is still there, intact and proud, as a testament to the truth that no darkness can forever obscure the light of justice.